preschool friends. Today we're going to read the story of the very first Easter. Jesus had been staying in Bethany, where his friends Martha, Mary, and Lazarus lived. But he knew that the time had come for him to go to Jerusalem. The people in Jerusalem wanted him to be their king. But Jesus knew that his Father in heaven had something even more important for him to do. As Jesus approached Jerusalem, many people went out to meet him, waving palm branches. And the people knew who he was, and they were very excited to see him. Hosanna! Hosanna to the King! Hosanna to the Son of David, they shouted. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. They had a beautiful parade for him. Several days later was Passover. This was the celebration of the holy day when God delivered the children of Israel from the Egyptians. Jesus and his 12 disciples got together at a friend's house in Jerusalem for the special Passover supper. As they were eating, Jesus took some bread and he blessed it and broke it. He passed it out to his disciples and he said, "Take this and eat it. This is my body." Then he took his cup, gave thanks and said, "All of you drink from it. This is my blood of the covenant, poured out for the forgiveness of sins." There are a lot of big words in there. One of those words is covenant. Do you guys know what a covenant is? A covenant is a very special promise that Jesus promises that his blood will save his people from their sins. And forgiveness means that you take away someone's punishment for them. You say, "I know that you did this wrong, but I'm going to say that it's okay. I'm going to take care of that for you. I forgive you." Everybody was happy that they could be together for this special supper, but Jesus seemed sad. He looked around the table at his disciples and said, "One of you will turn me over to our enemies." Oh no, that means one of these people is going to give Jesus to the bad guys that want to hurt him. 11 of his disciples couldn't believe their ears, but Judas knew. Judas knew exactly what Jesus was talking about. After supper, Jesus took his disciples to the Mount of Olives. Then Peter, James, and John went with Jesus to a grove of olive trees called the Garden of Gethsemane. And Jesus often went to this place with his disciples to pray and to rest. Jesus went among the trees and knelt down to pray. He asked God the Father to help him face what he knew was going to happen soon. When Jesus came back to the 3 disciples, he found them sleeping and asked them to pray with him, but they fell asleep again. He went and he prayed 2 more times, and when the disciples awoke, they heard a noise of a crowd and saw flashing torches. The crowd was armed with swords, clubs, and spears. Judas rushed from the crowd and greeted Jesus with a kiss, as though he were glad to see him. The crowd knew Judas would kiss Jesus to betray him, and they grabbed Jesus and they arrested him. One of the disciples near Jesus drew his sword and cut off the ear of the slave of the high priest. But Jesus said, "No more of this." And he healed the slave's ear. He put it back on his head. And when Jesus' disciples saw that he would not allow them to fight, they were scared and they ran away. The crowd took Jesus to Caiaphas, the high priest. after a mock trial before Caiaphas, the crowd took Jesus to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, who ruled over Judea. He listened to their complaints about Jesus, and he offered either to set a criminal named Barabbas free or to set Jesus free. The crowd wanted Barabbas set free. Instead of telling them to let Jesus go, Pilate washed his hands. Let Barabbas go and let them have Jesus. The crowd cried, "Crucify him!" So the Roman soldiers took Jesus out of the city to the place called Calvary, or Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. And they made a huge cross to crucify Jesus on. A crowd of people followed Jesus and the soldiers. Some were enemies of Jesus, glad to see him suffer. They did many wicked and painful things to hurt Jesus. Others were friends of Jesus. Some women followed him, and they cried. Jesus turned to them and said, "Do not cry for me." The soldiers tried to make Jesus carry his own cross, but soon they found that he was too weak from his suffering and that he could not carry it. So they chose a man named Simon who was passing by, and they made him carry the cross to its place in Calvary. Do you see? Simon is helping Jesus carry that heavy cross. When they came to Calvary, the soldiers laid the cross down and stretched Jesus out on it. They drove nails through his hands and his feet to fasten him to the cross, and then they stood the cross upright with Jesus upon it. And while the soldiers were doing this dreadful work, Jesus prayed to God for them. He prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Two men who had been robbers, had been sentenced to die, were led to be crucified at the same time as Jesus. One was placed on a cross at his right, and the other at his left. Pilate ordered a sign hung over Jesus' head which read, "This is Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." The people in the crowd looked at Jesus on the cross and they mocked him. The priests and the scribes said, "He saved others, but he cannot save himself. If you can come down from the cross, we will believe in you." Even one of the robbers mocked Jesus, but the second robber scolded him. "Don't you fear God to talk like that?" he asked. "You are going to die in the same way. We deserve to die, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then this man said to Jesus, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus answered him, "Today you will be with me in heaven." Jesus saw his mother Mary and his friend Mary Magdalene standing near the cross. They were filled with sorrow for him. Also standing nearby was his disciple John. Jesus asked John to take care of his mother. Then a sudden darkness came over the land. Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? It is finished. Father, into your hands I give my spirit." At that moment there was a loud clap of thunder, and the earth shook like an earthquake. The Roman officer who had taken charge of the soldiers around the cross saw that which had taken place, how Jesus died, and he was afraid, and he said, "Surely this was the Son of God." That evening, Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy man who believed in Jesus, went to Pontius Pilate. He asked Pilate for permission to bury the body of Jesus. Joseph then took down his body from the cross and wrapped it in fine linen. Nicodemus, another man who believed in Jesus, brought precious spices, which they wrapped up with the body, and they placed the body in a tomb, which is a cave dug out of the rock. And they covered the opening of the tomb with a very large stone. The following morning, some of the people who had helped crucify Jesus came to Pilate, and they reminded him that what Jesus had said, "After 3 days I will rise again." Pilate gave orders that the tomb be watched for 3 days to make sure that no one tried to take the body away. Early on the first day of the week, there was a great earthquake, and an angel of the Lord came from heaven and rolled back the stone and sat on top of it. Mary Magdalene and some of the others came to the tomb and found the stone had been rolled away and saw the angel. And the angel told them not to be afraid. Jesus was not here. He had risen. Afterward, Jesus appeared to his disciples and stayed with them for 40 days. Then he was taken up into heaven. Today, when we celebrate Easter, we remember the day that Jesus rose from the dead.